Legacy and progression servers are an oft-requested feature that continually pops up from time to time, especially during periods of dissatisfaction with elements of the live game. Now, a legacy server is simply just a server that's running an older version of the game, while a progression server is one that would start off at the beginning of World of Warcraft and then progress through the game's expansion cycle over time, offering people essentially something close to that original progression. Today I'm going to go over the pros and cons of both, and I'm going to try to look at it a bit more from Blizzard's perspective, since I think there are some things that people don't really take into account. Kicking off the cons, we've got the problem of maintaining multiple versions of the game, and this is an aspect that I don't really hear people talk about that much. Doing legacy servers would involve resurrecting a few different versions of World of Warcraft, and that is going to take quite a bit of work. The number of bugs that, say, private servers experience both on a server and client end are not going to live up to the standards of a full Blizzard product. In fact, often in those private servers you find there are just lots of features which do not work. Quashing all of those bugs and getting those extra features in would all take quite a bit of work. Work that would involve going back to an older version of the game's codebase. Now, this is the kind of stuff that was replaced years ago, and therefore a lot of the devs won't have touched it in years. Not only that, but because their team is multiple times the size that it was during the vanilla game, well, many of the technical staff will not really have worked with how some of the things were back in that original version of the client, and of course the server side as well. Getting everything up to snuff is going to involve a lot of people relearning old and unused code systems, which probably isn't going to look like a great use of their available man-hours. If you're a project manager over at Blizzard, that's not really the best proposition. 5 different versions of Warcraft means 5 times more live builds that are in the hands of players. That's going to be a pain in the ass from a development and maintenance perspective. Another thing that's worth considering is how they would integrate those versions, older versions of the game, into the live server architecture. No doubt countless years of upgrades and things like that have changed how their servers are working, and getting that sort of extreme backwards compatibility may actually be an issue. And all of these things are just going to lead to an inefficient use of staff time. Now, yes, private servers can manage it, but they don't have the large populations that an official Blizzard product would bring, especially in the opening months of its release. As much as it would be possible for a few people to get together in a small scale and bring up one of those servers, doing it on a large business sort of perspective is going to be a tough challenge. Now, that is just for having a few static servers of old expansions. Progression servers, well, they're going to require a lot more work and maintenance because you're going to have to upgrade these versions of the game. You'll have to deal with any of the problems that moving from one expansion set to another is going to bring on both the client and server end. That's going to take a good bit of work, and as much as many of us would like for this to happen, there are lots of viable technical reasons why Blizzard would decide against it. All of that said, though, it absolutely is something that they could do. Another con is that it would, in a way, take away from the buzz of the live version of the game. I don't think this would be a very large problem, but from Blizzard's perspective, I can almost see them thinking that legacy servers would be taking away from the live game. This might include a bit of an element of internal pride, you know, the idea of, oh, well, we released the old game how it used to be and everyone just flocked over to that. I think that's kind of unlikely, but certainly it would suck a little bit of interest and, some players away from the live game, and I can definitely see them thinking that is a bit of a negative on their kind of slant that they're going with wanting, say, to build up Legion hype, instead of be taking away from that with, say, oh, you can actually play vanilla, don't bother about Legion. I'm not saying this is the most viable concern, but I can see it being something that would be going through the heads of the people at Blizzard who are making those decisions. Next, there's the issue that it could just be a short-term fad. We are currently in a position where people really want this to happen, but don't have access to it. Now, they are essentially the base conditions that are needed for hype and expectation to occur. I think it's very likely that many players would just hop onto legacy servers and probably not last that long. First of all, there's the prospect of leveling up a slew of new characters to endgame, and that being an endgame that's not going to grow and evolve. The Warcraft, and in fact the endgame for most MMOs, is a loot treadmill, and with legacy servers you're essentially turning that treadmill off. Now, that is different if you have progression servers where the game is moving from expansion to expansion, but still there is that feeling that what you're doing doesn't really matter because you're kind of on that, that server on the side. It's not really the big main version of the game. Guild attrition rates would likely be higher than on the live game, so I can imagine there being large raiding population problems within a few months. Maybe not in terms of just the population, but people moving in and out of raid teams and that being a bit of a pain. Now yes, it would likely stabilize, but I think that still is a concern. In reality, it may turn out that a relatively small proportion of people would actually want to do legacy servers for a long-term way of playing the game. Definitely a lot of people would drop in and check it out, but how many of those people would actually stay the distance? Another issue that I can definitely see being a concern to Blizzard is player-based fragmentation. Now, this actually could be a big enough issue even if it wasn't for that long. Blizzard's life is a whole lot easier when everyone is funneled into playing one build of the game at a time. Now, on top of the maintenance issues that appear there are also social concerns. Basically, that fragmentation will take people away from live servers and over to legacy servers. And when you think about that, well, what happens if 3 members of your raid team decide, you know what, we're going to do the legacy servers now, we'll be back in a month or two? I can see that being a bit of a concern in terms of just fragmenting players, people being spread out against multiple builds of the game, which then technically have got multiple endgames. There's probably only so many people who are actually up for doing that endgame content, so I can see them thinking that this would have an effect on raid teams and parts of the social glue that really hold the game together. From my perspective, that's certainly something that I think would start to self-regulate after a month or two, but I can still see the concern, absolutely. Let's cover the pros. So, they gain another revenue stream. I think this one's pretty obvious. They could monetize legacy servers. The reason behind this would be simple enough. They could say, well, it increases our maintenance, it increases our development workflow, so it's $5 a month, $10 a month to get access to those servers, a bit like what they do with the tournament servers. Now, even if they didn't monetize it, it would provide people who are bored with the live game something to do instead of unsubscribing from the game. Now that is going to mean maybe that their overall number of subscriptions isn't going to dip as much when you have a content drought in the current game, like, what we basically see at the end of every expansion. On the whole, though, I do think if they played their cards right, this could be a profitable venture, to say the least. Another plus is that players will get to experience content that they really miss and want to relive again, or people who missed that content in the first place will actually get a chance to experience it at the intended kind of, difficulty level setting sort of state of the game. Now, this is likely the main reason why this is a heavily requested feature. As time has went on, many aspects of the game have changed to the stage where some would prefer some elements of how the game was designed in the past. If you are in the position of not enjoying Warlords of Draenor, but you still want to play World of Warcraft, then this provides an opportunity to still play the game and not have to unsubscribe because you don't have much else to do. Of course, the idea of reliving some of those old times, even if that isn't particularly realistic, is still a very, very strong idea. It's something a lot of people are interested in. And do I think it's a pro overall? Yes, absolutely. Being able to go back and, say, progress through the Burning Crusade slew of raids, I think that could be a very enjoyable and beneficial experience to lots of people. Hell, with the way the TBC raids were designed, you could actually just release the final patch sans Sunwell nerfs, and that would be a lot of content that would take people a long time to progress through. So for all the people who didn't raid in TBC, that would be a lot of entertainment value, potentially anyway. Another plus is that it could attract old-timers. Since Wrath of the Lich King, the game has dipped from 12.1 million subs to 5.6 million, though I'm sure that number will bounce up quite a good bit for the launch of Legion. Still, all of that combined with the fact that the subscriber base is pretty much always in flux, means that there are millions and millions of people out there who could be drawn back into the game by the idea of nostalgia. I think elements of Warlords' marketing definitely showed that, but the idea of, maybe when I was 16 I was playing the Burning Crusade and it was great. To someone who is, now quite a bit older, and, hearing, well, Blizzard are now officially doing the Burning Crusade servers, I think for those people, that could be a very compelling reason just to pop back into the game. So that's a plus for them, in that they get not a unique entertainment experience, but certainly one that is maybe unique today. And of course for Blizzard, again, it is a way to get more people back into the game and giving them money, which is great because they love money, and there's really nothing wrong with that. They are a business after all, and yeah, money's kind of a thing they like. Another pro is that it does create another treadmill. This is more a pro from Blizzard's perspective, but you can see how it would sort of affect players. If they do progression servers, and this is more specifically for progression servers, then they essentially create another treadmill for players to be hooked on. Having a server progress from expansion to expansion means that there is still that feeling that what you are doing matters and would be maintained kind of far more than, you know, say if a server was just statically set to the final patch of an expansion. As much as that does sound good, though, I can see a lot of people being super hyped about progression servers for the duration of Vanilla, Wrath, and TBC, but then once it hits Cataclysm, I can see people just dropping off from those servers, which I think would really hurt the raiding population of those servers and would be a bit of a strange kind of conundrum for Blizzard to be in. The reason I say that's because it just seems like Wrath and TBC are quite a bit more in demand, and certainly TBC's design mentality is very different from some of the more modern ones. Still, I think for many of us, the idea of starting at Vanilla and having a few years of just enjoying TBC and Wrath is really appealing. I can definitely say that personally, that is a very appealing prospect to me. I would love to see that happen. So, to conclude, really this is a mixed bag. Would it make a profit for Blizzard? Yes, it would. It would make a lot of money for them, probably. However, that would be at the cost of a major headache for the development team, it would be at the cost of fragmenting players and causing a few other issues. As a player, I don't think it offers many cons at all, bar the possibility of friends and raid members being somewhere else on a different version of the game than you. So, really for players, it's just another option. It's a case of take it or leave it. Whether it exists or not, as long as it doesn't affect the current game that much, it doesn't really matter. Though for Blizzard's perspective, there most definitely are cons, which sort of go along with the potential pros of making a bit more money. Personally, I would be happy enough to see something along these lines to come into the game, but I'm also really not that bothered about it. I mean, I'd love to see it happen, but I'm not going to throw a fit if it doesn't. I certainly think there are cons for Blizzard, and I think a lot of those cons do make a good bit of sense. Certainly, in the future, the time may come where it does actually make more sense. EverQuest 2 recently announced a very similar feature with their time-locked servers, and what's cool about the time-locked servers is the progression of the server is something that the players on the server vote on, so whether you move to the next expansion or not is quite literally a thing that could be voted on. I've got a feeling that someone within the World of Warcraft team is paying very close attention to its performance. Now that said, EQ2 is a fraction the size of World of Warcraft, even now at Warcraft's lowest point since Vanilla, but still, it could be a very interesting case study which could prove that something like this would actually work. I think EQ1 does have progression servers or something similar to that, but EQ2 I think is a little bit more analogous to elements of World of Warcraft. Anyway, that's it for this video. Let me know what your thoughts are on this topic, especially on Twitter. That's the easiest place to get a hold of me. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.